The word of my testimony for which I was slain. Chapter 9. There is so much of my testimony to write that my hand can only take so much before I have to rest. I have to tend to other life matters as well, so when I return to writing, I may be inspired to write about other important points of my testimony. I desire to continue with my prayer at the age of 14, but I need to write other things. I would apologize for jumping from one thing to another, but I'm not sorry. I am surrounded by my enemies, and there's no telling how much time until I have to leave. When the enemy begins the next phase of their plan, things will begin to happen quickly, and the time for writing will be over. So, if my jumping around has bothered you, get over it. While staying home to stop the spread of the new coronavirus that, once again, was completely new, the media told us it was from eating sick bats. Disgusting, right? If that's as far as the person thought it through, it sounded plausible. Was eating bats something the Chinese people recently began doing? No. So how come this coronavirus had not caused a pandemic with massive death tolls that they told us was at our doorsteps? Because it was new, and they had invented it, and then unleashed it. I know I'm not the only one to grasp this truth because they began censoring the truth, calling it misinformation, and removing the platform that we had been led to believe was a safe place to speak freely. Reality is, not only were people removed from the internet, but having effectively separated them from the herd into individuals so that they couldn't find each other for support, these demonically inspired perpetrators destroyed many of their careers and thus their lives. Here's the point that many seem to have missed. They branded the virus as COVID-19. I asked myself, what did the 19 represent? Did it mean something about its chemical composition? Did it mean this was the 19th coronavirus they had invented? If the latter is true, I had never heard reference to COVID-18 or 17 or any other number. In fact, this was the first I could recall the term COVID being connected to the oddly familiar coronavirus concept. That worried me very little prior to this point. Finally, I asked myself and then Google what was the first coronavirus ever discovered. The answer to the first one and the list of them all hit me like a ton of bricks. Number 1 was HIV, the virus that caused AIDS. I remembered the day I heard about it and thinking it seemed unlikely a new disease would suddenly appear without some sort of cause. Almost immediately I had heard that some guy in Africa had sex with a monkey and that started it. Ew, disgusting, right? Then we were told it was running rampant in the homosexual communities and junkies that shared needles. Other coronaviruses listed included SARS, MERS, bird flu, swine flu, and others I had never heard of. 2 weeks to stop the spread had gone worldwide. I was amazed that this shutdown of the economy was taking place worldwide, and after 2 weeks had come and gone, I began hearing many leaders of various countries begin saying the exact same catchphrase, which is, "We're going to build back better." Well, that alarmed me immensely. It showed a coordinated effort, and to me, the sinister darkness that lay beneath the surface was frightening. I cried out to God, asking what the heck was going on here. Have you ever asked God a question and used the magic 8-ball approach and randomly open your Bible and just look and read from that spot? I had done that several times before, never really expecting a direct answer, but oftentimes noticed that what I would read kind of did address at least an aspect of my question. So that's what I did then. When I looked, it was the beginning of Revelation chapter 6. I began reading. John, having seen his vision in a dream, began describing the first seal. He saw a rider on a white horse, and he was... The next words hit me with so much relevant force, I just stood there, jaw dropped open. He was given a crown. I suddenly realized that a crown could be correctly called a corona and vice versa. Given a quiver with no arrows. Seems like if John saw a syringe, the container portion could have been determined to quiver, not seeing arrows in it, but in some way given concepts of representing a shot or shooting. It fit. Goes out conquering and to conquer. Holy crap, that corroborates with these coronaviruses that began with HIV when I was a teenager. I read further. Red horse that takes away world peace. There seemed to be a lot in media about Russia warring against Ukraine, and China had begun flexing its muscles in Asian regions. Both those countries have a strong association with the color red. Taking away world peace must be talking about World War, but it couldn't have been World War I or World War II because those came long before coronavirus. The third horseman indicated inflation and famine. Well, shutting down the economy and then having the world banks flood the market with newly printed cash that had no collateral to back it was certainly going to cause inflation. And I had heard about protesting farmers who were angry at new laws prohibiting nitrogen fertilizers because it made it unprofitable to continue farming, knowing crop yields would be too small to make all the payments to the bank. I had heard of similar fertilizer bans in many different places, a coordinated effort, obviously, but we were being told it was necessary to combat global warming, an idea that had controversy surrounding it. But the experts in media seemingly convinced world politicians to ignore controversy and immediately make new laws and taxes on the people. The effects of such laws do little against global warming and effectively result in famine. The pale horse, whose rider's name is Death, well, Dr. Fauci had been all over the news, and I recall, not thinking much of it at the time, a comment I had read on a YouTube video that Fauci was a French word for death. I had to fact-check that. What I learned was the word would be found in a statement like, the soldier mowed down the enemy with his machine gun. Well, I was flabbergasted. I called my mom to tell her how certain I am that this virus and the first horseman are the same things. Of course, it wasn't received. She was used to what she thought was me over-exaggerating the matter because for nearly 10 years of fruitful ministry, I would call and tell her something someone in the church had done to me or said to me that was not cool. Usually it was our pastor who was the offender. She would always say, "It can't be like the way you perceived it. Everyone at church, especially Pastor Dennis, always tell me you're doing such a good job. Don't you think you're exaggerating what really happened?" Well, by the end of 10 years, I felt a bit angry that in her eyes, whatever problem I had been having were my fault because I blew everything out of proportion. I sought out a pastor from a random church to talk about Revelation 6:1. When I finished telling him what I believed may be happening, holding back a smile, he asked me, "So then, are you pre-trib, mid-trib, or post-trib?" What took me by surprise, that's where his mind went. Without thinking too hard, I said, "Well, I guess it would make me mid-trib." He smiled, gave me a copy of the Epoch Times, and ended our conversation. After I left, it dawned on me that mid-trib position was clearly false because the rapture doctrine seemed correct about the last generation of Christians were not appointed for wrath and would be removed before tribulation. I was left with two options, which both could not be true. Either all of the literal connections that I had made about prophecy connection to current verifiable facts was not really connected. The real events then must be even more obvious than what had convinced me, or the opening of the seals wasn't the beginning of tribulation, and by all appearances, my generation would see the horsemen ride and not recognize the season they were in. And that's when God's Spirit moved me to recall when the disciples came to Jesus and asked him what it would be like in the last days. He spoke of great deception. I knew at that moment that the seals were not judgments and that the fifth seal revealing the martyred saints told us that they had been the main targets of the horsemen. My generation of Christian brothers and sisters are the remnant, and that when the rapture does happen, those that remain will be a remnant of the remnant and will have seen their fellow Christians slaughtered.